Dr. Nathan Jacobs has advanced degrees in philosophy, theology, church history, and fine art, and has taught philosophy at Calvin College, Trinity College, and at the University of Kentucky. In addition to his academic work, he's also produced a couple of films: Killing Poe, a narrative feature film, as well as Becoming Truly Human, a documentary film. Dr. Jacobs is currently focused on filmmaking largely, and is in pre-production for another feature narrative film. I was really glad for the opportunity to sit down with Dr. Jacobs recently to discuss orthodoxy, philosophy, theology, fine art, among other things. So I hope you'll enjoy this episode from my interview with Dr. Nathan Jacobs.
The project was actually one that was brought to me. I've talked about this before, where the Antiochian Archdiocese was interested in doing some sort of outreach to religiously unaffiliated folks. And my name came up from a consultant they had reached out to who said, well, you're trained in philosophy, you're trained in theology, you're a convert to Orthodoxy, you're a filmmaker, artist. Let's see what he has to say. And one of the things that was particularly interesting to me about the project was, at least the way this group had explained it to me, was that it seems that a lot of folks who start to become curious about Orthodoxy are people who are Protestants who have become disillusioned with Protestantism. So they're looking for something else, or Catholics, same sort of story. And they said, well, look, there's this growing trend that everybody's talking about in terms of the movement away from religion generally, the religiously unaffiliated folks. So why don't we talk to those folks and see what's going on with them, and see if perhaps Orthodoxy can offer a home to any of those folks. Now, the reason that actually resonated with me is because I fit into that demographic. I wasn't actually, to be perfectly transparent, I wasn't really paying attention to that trend. My research on the nuns, right, the folks with no religious affiliation, N-O-N-E-S, nuns, started because that group had asked me to look into this trend. And as I looked at the trend and started reading about the nuns, I thought, oh, that was me. And so I immediately resonated with the idea that that some of the impulses of the nuns may well resonate with Orthodoxy, that what they're disassociating with, and the reason is that they're disassociating from religion as they know it, that they may end up finding a home in Orthodoxy. And that was just my instinct, having been somebody who fit this trend. And so that's where I proposed a project, which was somewhat speculative at the time. It required research, but the basic gist of what I put out there was, I thought, well, the first thing you need to do with this group, if you really want to reach out to them, is to acknowledge that they're real people with real stories who have legitimate experiences and thoughts and questions that have sort of moved them in this direction. There was nothing disingenuous about my movement away from religion. And so I figured the best way to do that, if you really want to do that, you sort of, the best way to humanize a person is just to let them speak and share their story without sort of judgment or critique or anything like that. And then I suggested that, if you want to start a conversation, the best way to start a conversation, well, you have to be honest about the fact that folks who are religiously unaffiliated, who have made this movement away, probably have a little bit of hesitation about talking with religious people, because their experience is probably that my parents disapprove of the fact that I've left, being Baptist, I don't know, or I'm no longer Presbyterian. And I'm accustomed that whenever I have a conversation with them about faith, there's a backdoor agenda, which is to somehow pull me back to the church and not actually acknowledge the legitimacy of what I've gone through. And so I thought, well, the best way to open up a conversation that doesn't have that sort of put up your guard and remains an open, honest conversation about matters of faith is to put religiously unaffiliated folks in conversation with religiously unaffiliated folks. Because the fact of the matter is, just because two people have both wandered away from religion doesn't mean they've wandered in the same direction. And so they'll start to get differences of perspective if they start to talk to one another. And at least then you're stirring conversation and providing some sort of avenue for thinking about topics of faith. And then I suggested that the third thing that you would really want a project like this to do is to offer the story of somebody who left faith, went on the journey they're on, and discovered orthodoxy. And discovered orthodoxy because it offered some sort of satisfying home, relative to what they had walked away from. So that was the basic idea. And anybody who's watched Becoming Truly Human recognizes, oh, that's exactly what Becoming Truly Human is. It's those three components: these one-on-one interviews, this roundtable discussion with nuns, and then the third component, which is the journey, my journey, away from religion, and then eventually to orthodoxy. Now, I did not know when I was proposing this that I was proposing to give my journey to the world. That was not something I ever anticipated doing, and something I was very hesitant to do. In fact, that's why at the beginning of the film it opens with me saying very candidly and honestly, I considered walking away. This is a very vulnerable thing. This is a very scary thing. I think it's very easy to be misunderstood as if I'm suggesting that I'm, a saint, which I'm certainly not, that I'm the example par excellence of spiritual journey, also very much not. And so the only way I knew to try to attempt to dispel those sorts of misconceptions by putting my story out there was to actually say up front and again at the end, if this is what you think is happening in this film, you've misunderstood it, was to, attack it direct on. But nonetheless, that was the idea for putting it out there, and thankfully the folks I was talking to thought, yeah, that's a worthwhile project, we'll take a risk and support it. In terms of, for myself, one of the things that I wanted to do with that project, what I wanted to accomplish was not just making certain folks who I resonate with. I really do resonate with nuns. When I listen to them talk, I say, yep, I really don't have everything that you object to about Christianity as you know it. I resonate with that. Your spiritual inclinations, I resonate with those. So one of the things I wanted to do, though, in doing that project was offer, I suppose, to the nuns, offer some sort of hope that maybe your journey is headed someplace. Because I do think a lot of folks who end up disassociating from religion for the reason, like the nuns do, oftentimes they feel like they're a ship at sea, right? Who do I talk to? And this is something that came out in a lot of my pre-screenings with nuns that we interviewed as prospective candidates for the film, was just that, who do they talk to, right? Are they going to talk to their parents who are upset about the fact that they're no longer, going to church? Are they going to talk to their friends? Well, maybe, if the friends are also nuns, but maybe not, because it's a heated, scary topic. Religion is, faith is, spirituality is. And so I wanted to provide some sort of hope to them that says, hey, you're not alone. Your questions are normal questions. Your journey is a human, valid journey, and just because you're currently disassociated from religion doesn't mean you'll never find a home someplace, right? And that was something that I think is really important to realize, is that the nuns are not, most of the nuns, the majority of nuns that I've talked to, are not comfortable with their current standing. It's not as if they disassociated from religion, said I'm spiritual, not religious, and I'm comfortable with that. They still are troubled by questions like what happens after I die. They are troubled by the fact that they don't really have people they can talk to about spiritual questions. And one of the reasons they're troubled by that is because they want to talk about the spiritual questions, because they recognize that those questions matter. So I wanted to offer that to them, and also to folks who perhaps have kids who are nuns, or friends who are nuns, and maybe they've never gone through that, they've never understood it, to offer some sort of humanized perspective on the religiously unaffiliated. Because I think one of the things that is a common misconception is that when you look at the stats, and I see this I see this misconception come through from both, say, your average evangelical apologist or evangelist and your average new atheist apologist and evangelist. When they see that, 25% or 27%, is disassociated from religion, no longer religiously affiliated, the presumption is, the atheists are winning the cultural wars, right? The new atheists have won the argument. But in my experience with the nuns, and I'm not the only one whose research has shored this up, I've seen New York Times articles say the same. I saw, a research grant on this topic found the same, is that it seems like the majority of nuns, clear majority of nuns, are not atheists, right? Even within the Pew's own findings, I think they had 13% of the nuns self-identified as atheists. And in my experience, even those who would say I'm an atheist will always qualify it because they're not dogmatists. So they're like, yeah, I'm an atheist. Well, I lean atheist. I mean, I suppose there could be something, it could be wrong. So it's more of an agnostic leaning atheist. They do still see themselves as spiritual and having spiritual inclinations and things like that. It's just that their inklings in terms of spirituality in the world have disconnected with the faith of their youth. And usually that means I was raised Protestant of some kind, or I was raised Catholic of some kind, and something about that form of Christianity doesn't resonate with my inclinations or my intuitions about spirituality in the world. So there's been a disassociation there and a disconnect there, and they find themselves as ships at sea. And one of the things that I think people need to recognize is that just because a person is currently, on a spiritual journey without a clear affiliation, doesn't mean that that journey has no destination. And I think that's something important for folks to recognize, both folks who maybe know nuns, but they themselves have never identified with that because they've been happily Baptist their whole life or something like that. I think it's important that perspective shift is there, and that they realize that these are people on spiritual journeys with an unknown destination, mainly because they don't know what they're looking for. They know that it's not that, right? And there's reached a breaking point with that set them on this journey, but that doesn't mean that they're forever without a destination. I think that's an important thing. So I wanted to offer, in some ways, some sense of, understanding of a more positive understanding of the nuns and who they are, and some latitude for them as human beings who are on a spiritual journey, as well as some encouragement to folks who actually are religiously unaffiliated and are on that journey and maybe feel alone or feel like an oddity. In many ways, trying to draw out that picture of nuns as folks who are, not yet complete, right? That their identity isn't wrapped up in what they are no longer. Their identity is still in some ways to be determined, right? This journey is headed someplace. It's just that they don't know where, and so that's why they are currently unaffiliated. So that was really a big part of my motive in putting out there, Becoming Truly Human. And I think in some ways the way people react to it is oftentimes telling in terms of where they're at with those things. So folks who want to hear want to hear that the trend, the data means that the new atheists are winning, and they are dogmatic atheists, usually hate Becoming Truly Human because they think, well, this isn't really about the nuns, right? Because all of these people, or most of these people, would identify as spiritual and not religious and so on. And that's not what they want to hear, but that is the majority of that group. And folks who would really like some sort of apologetic tour de force that's going to sit there and say, and here's why all of your questions are wrong, and here's all the answers to all your questions, are also disappointed because the film doesn't offer that, right? It doesn't sit there and do a blow-by-blow sort of apologetic rejoinder sort of thing. It just actually allows all the people and their stories to speak, and then leaves it to the audience to do with that what they will. But as I said, my own motivation was to give voice and flesh and blood to a group that I identify with, and try to offer a humanized portrait of that group. And since I was one of them.
Hi again, hope you enjoyed this episode from my interview with Dr. Nathan Jacobs. Please subscribe below to get notified when new videos become available. And if you did enjoy this video, please consider becoming a patron of this channel. There's a link to the patronage program below this video. Thanks for your support, and we'll see you soon.